Class is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hi, good afternoon. Today is Tuesday, May 28th. The Developmental Disabilities Administration welcomes you to the DDA Educational Series webinar. Today's topic is Understanding Appeals and Reconsideration. Before we begin, I'd like to go over a few things about the webinar. This webinar is open to all stakeholders and will be recorded and put on the DDA website. All participants are in listen-only mode. There are two options for listening to the webinar, by computer and by phone. And if you have trouble hearing, you can try switching modes by clicking the appropriate button on the webinar panel in the audio section. There are handouts for this webinar, which you can find in the handout section. If you are listening in by phone and you would like them emailed, you can email me, Donna Will, at donna.will@maryland.gov to receive them. We will be recording today's webinar, and if you send me an email, I can send you a link. We will be putting the educational series on the DDA website, and all the sessions will soon be posted. Questions can be typed in the question box, which is in the webinar panel, and they will be read and answered aloud as long as they relate to today's topic. So we have a few DDA staff presenting today. We have Amy Doherty, who is the DDA policy analyst, and we also have Patricia Sestoki, Director of Programs, who I'd like to say welcome and good morning, or good afternoon, gosh.
Good afternoon, Donna. Thank you for the nice introduction. Hopefully you had a really nice weekend.
Yes.
Long weekend.
Thank you.
Because now we have a short week, so it's great. All right, so thank you, everyone. As you always know, we start with our welcoming of our values and what we believe the administration, our overview of what we do. And we believe that all people have the right to live, love, work, learn, play, and pursue their life aspirations in the community. And so we say that with really true meaning, and they're not just words. We really want to make sure that everything we do at DDA is infiltrated in everything that we do, from presentations to policies to procedures. And because of that, we want to make sure that we partner with families and people with developmental disabilities to provide supports and resources to fulfill their life's dreams. So we provide a coordination of services by delivering services to children and adults with intellectual and developmental disabilities and their families. And when we say we're doing a coordinated effort, we really are looking at how do we support a family and a person in services to identify work, towards self-determination, interdependence, productivity, integration, and inclusion in all facets of their community across the lifespan. That means from birth to death. And so we really want to make sure that the DDA offers those opportunities, and within that, to help families explore what type of circle of supports do they have that in their community to really look into self-determination. We are one of many resources of services and supports available to assist the individuals with developmental disabilities and families to build their lives towards their vision of the good life. And the good life could be whatever that person defines as a good life. So we want to be able to be a resource, and we're hoping these educational webinars will help and continue to help families and providers and people in services so they can come to us for resources. And this is our second month, and we're looking at doing this in June as well. So stay tuned, because we'll be posting the June sessions by the end of tomorrow, and then we will be able to record them. Now, those of you have been asking about where they're being recorded, and so when you go to the DDA's website, go to the webinar section, click under the webinars, and then to the right-hand side, you'll see the links to the different webinars that we've been doing since April. So, as you all know, DDA serves birth to death, children and adults. And we also support families, and we serve families. And we really believe that in order for us to be able to serve people with individual and intellectual disabilities, and developmental disabilities, we have to look at that person. So we want to use the integrated support STAR, which really is where the person is the center of what we try to do. They drive the bus, they drive the services, and we really want to start thinking about what is the trajectory to that person's good life, all the way from being involved in their community, being employed, being a member and a participant member of their community, to take vacations. So to do that, how do we do that? So we want to focus on the person's strengths and assets. We want to look at people's relationships. Who are the person's circle of supports? Who can they count on to be a person in their team or can help them with resources? Technology, what resources and technology do they can help enhance their quality of life? And the community resources, church, banks, doctors, And then what you see in the right-hand screen right there is eligibility specific. That's where DDA stands. A DDA is one small part of the whole person's circles of supports and assistance. And so we want to start thinking about really not what is the service that DDA offers, but what is that person's trajectory to a good life, and then how do you build that into that person's life, whether if you're using DOORS or DDA or any other resources out there in the community. So we really want to always focus on the persons first before we start thinking about a service specific, and we want people's lives and dreams to be more of a focus versus services. And so to do that, we offer services across the state, and we have 4 offices. And here, what you see on the screen is the region, who is in charge of that region, who's your director, what counties that we serve, and the phone numbers. So I'm now going to turn this over to Amy Doherty, who is going to go over the process of appeals.
Thank you, Patricia. My name's Amy Doherty, and one of my roles at the DDA is to participate in the appeals process. My role varies depending on the situation and type of appeal. My first contact with participants most often is after the participant has received a letter informing them of an adverse decision by the DDA's regional office. And at that time, the participant submits either a request for reconsideration or a written request for a hearing, and sometimes they submit both. What I do is I review the documents, and if the documents aren't clear or if they're incomplete, I'll follow up with the participant. And if they are complete, that's when I send them on to another office within the Maryland Department of Health, known as the Office of Health Services. The Office of Health Services then sends, and this is going to sound confusing, but hopefully at the end this will all make sense. Then the Office of Health Services sends them to the Office of Administrative Hearings, and there's a lot that goes on behind the scenes. I'll also schedule a case resolution conference or an informal hearing, and I participate in that process. And then later we will talk about if you are requesting your records. That's where I follow through to make sure the authorized person receives the requested records. So I say this to let you know that my role is different from the regional office staff's role, and I'll talk a little bit more about who does what later in this presentation. So to start with this presentation, I wanted to share why an appeals process is necessary. And that's where we look at DDA staff and they make decisions that impact your eligibility as well as people's access to services. And sometimes the decision is correct and sometimes it's not. If you consider the number of people enrolled in services and who've been determined eligible, there's a lot of review that goes on at the regional office. And they want to ensure that you can seek resolution when you disagree with the decision that they've made. Disagreements can be resolved either by submitting a request for reconsideration form with supporting documentation or a written request for a hearing. So let's talk a little bit about DDA's role and authority. The Maryland Department of Health is an agency of the government of Maryland that's responsible for public health issues. The department was formed in 1969 as the Maryland Department of Health and Mental Hygiene, and it was known as DHMH until its name changed in 2017. Some people are still unaware when we refer to the Maryland Department of Health that it is the same as DHMH. So I just wanted to share that the DDA is a division within the Maryland Department of Health, formerly known as DHMH. The Maryland Department of Health doesn't only include the Developmental Disabilities Administration, it also includes the Behavioral Health Administration, the Maryland Medicaid Administration, as well as the Public Health Administration. So the Maryland Department of Health is a very large organization. The DDA, under the Maryland Department of Health, administers, oversees, and funds health and support services provided to eligible Maryland residents who have been determined developmentally disabled. And the DDA often collaborates with other administrations within the Maryland Department of Health, such as the Maryland Medicaid Program, the Department of Education, the Division of Rehab Services, and other state agencies. So a few moments ago, you did hear me refer to the Office of Health Services. That's the division that handles appeals for the Maryland Department of Health, and they don't fall under DDA. They fall under the Maryland Medicaid Administration of the Maryland Department of Health. So in addition to licensing community-based providers and operating the Potomac Center, Holly Center, and SET, the DDA administers payment for approved services and determines who meets eligibility criteria, as well as people's priority on the waiting list. The majority of appeals involve these two areas. That's where we're looking at when budget modifications are reviewed, they either are approved or denied, modified service funding plans, initial service funding plans, as well as DDA looks at who's eligible, and if so, where are they placed on the waiting list. Sometimes people disagree with the eligibility determination or their priority on the waiting list. So when DDA makes a decision and you disagree, what can you do? Well, today's presentation will inform you that you can appeal the decision, which is when you submit a request for a hearing, or you can ask DDA to reconsider the decision, which is called a request for reconsideration. This topic can be overly technical, and my goal is to speak in a way that can be understood. Because regulations determine the different processes, I have put the regulatory citations on my slide. And I'm not a lawyer, I'm a regular person who happens to work for a state agency. I recognize DDA is similar to other state agencies in that we rely heavily on acronyms and other unfamiliar terms that are best called industry terms. So if I slip and use an acronym with which you're not familiar or a phrase that you don't understand, please feel free to type in to let me know so that I can clarify. The appeals process is intended to be user-friendly. DDA response letters are long. They are form letters, and included with the form letters are numerous attachments. These form letters were modified to respond to your specific request, so you may read them and feel they seem impersonal. And that's not the intention. The intention of the letter is to convey as much information as possible to assist you in understanding the decision. But these letters, which are long, were created by lawyers, and they do use legal language and regulatory citations. The letters do make sense to some people, but they don't make sense to others. If I'm only able to convey one message with today's talk topic, it's to please call your regional office if you don't understand your determination letter. The DDA staff want to help. And please remember when I said the response letters are long, that part of the reason they're long is because they include attachments. They often will include a pre-addressed hearing form as well as a 2-page notice that explains the type of hearing that's offered to resolve your dispute. So in addition to your letter, you'll receive a 2-page hearing notice, The purpose of this hearing notice is to explain your rights and describe some important things such as, how do you request a hearing? What is the time frame in which the hearing must be requested? Different hearings have different time frames. It may be up to 90 days for a Medicaid fair hearing or 45 days for an informal or formal hearing. The attachment will advise you of the time frame you have, as well as a 4-day grace period, which allows for the mail to be received. The 2-page notice also will explain to you what a Medicaid fair hearing is, or what is an informal hearing or formal hearing. It will let you know that the individual may represent himself or use legal counsel or appoint an authorized representative. Finally, the notice will inform you that if the denial warrants a Medicaid fair hearing, the Medicaid fair hearing rights notice will describe how to settle some or all of the issues in the appeal without having to go to a hearing, including the option to participate in a case resolution conference as described later in this presentation. The second attachment with these types of hearings is a pre-addressed hearing request form, and the purpose of the form is to convey the type of hearing you're able to request, as well as to help you specify which decision you think is wrong. Earlier in this presentation, I stated that these are form letters that are used. So with these letters, they give you an option to choose from the type of dispute that you disagree with. So you should check the dispute that corresponds with your request. For example, if the hearing request form says that the hearing request form will always offer 3 options. The first being that you didn't meet the eligibility criteria. The second you could contest is that you don't agree with your priority category determination. And the third you can request is that you disagree with the denial, partial denial, reduction, or termination of specific Medicaid waiver services. So usually if you're not sure what to check, if you attach the denial letter with this form, then it will be easier for the appeals office to understand what decision you disagree with. And then if you receive a letter explaining how to request an informal or formal hearing, it will give you the opportunity to not only state which decision you disagree with, but also to say if you want to have an informal hearing first, followed by a formal hearing if you request it after the informal, or you can waive your right to an informal and proceed with the formal hearing. So let's talk about these specific hearings.
You may go back to the last one.
No, okay, sorry. So this slide includes the regulations. The COMAR stands for Code of Maryland, and these regulations can be found at the Division of State Documents. You'll see where it says COMAR regulations can be viewed, and then federal regulations where you see the Code of Federal Regulations listed up there. They can be viewed on several websites, but one of the easier websites to use is the one listed on this slide. So the forum in which appeals are heard is based on state funding versus federal funding or waiver funding. You don't need to worry about determining if you need a Medicaid fair hearing or a formal or informal hearing, because the notification will include a hearing request form to assist you in properly filing an appeal. But if you need assistance filing your appeal, you can contact your Coordinator of Community Service, the CCS, if you have one, or DDA's regional office. Now I'll describe the Medicaid fair hearing, informal and formal hearings. The Medicaid fair hearing is held by the Office of Administrative Hearings. The Office of Administrative Hearings often is referred to as OAH. At the Office of Administrative Hearings, the Medicaid fair hearing is held in front of an administrative law judge who decides whether or not DDA was wrong in its decision. The Office of Administrative Hearings, also known as OAH, is independent of DDA and the Maryland Department of Health. OAH will schedule the date, time, and location of your hearing. The hearing will be at a place reasonably convenient and accessible to you. And at the hearing, you may represent yourself or you may have legal counsel. DDA will be represented by its attorney. You may bring any witnesses or documents you want to use to establish the facts and to explain your circumstances. You may also request witness testify by telephone. A reasonable number of people from the public can be admitted, and prior to the hearing, you may ask to review the documents and records that DDA will use at the hearing and for the names of the witnesses that DDA intends to call. Prior to attending the Medicaid fair hearing, you will have the opportunity to meet with DDA, regional office staff, and discuss the denial at a voluntary meeting called a case resolution conference. Whereas Medicaid fair hearings can be requested when waiver services are denied, people who are denied Medicaid state-only funding can choose between an informal or formal hearing. An informal hearing is held in front of a DDA official who's designated by the Secretary of the Maryland Department of Health to hear appeals. This person's called the Secretary's designee. The Secretary's designee was not involved in the decision made on your request for services. The decision by the Secretary's designee at the informal hearing is binding on DDA, which means that DDA will not appeal the decision if it's in favor of you. In most cases, the Secretary's designee is me. So I will schedule the informal hearing, and advance notice in writing will be given to you of the issue to be decided, the reason DDA gave for denying your request, and the date, time, and place that you'll have the hearing. Additional information when scheduling an informal hearing will be provided, such as your right to be present, your right to be represented by an attorney or by a relative, friend, or other person, and the right to request and present witnesses and documentary evidence. At the informal hearing, you'll have the opportunity to explain why you believe the regional office's decision was incorrect. And if you're not satisfied with the outcome of your informal hearing, you can appeal and have an administrative law judge with the Office of Administrative Hearings decide at a formal hearing whether or not the informal hearing decision was correct. And when you're denied Maryland state-only funding, you also have the right to skip the informal hearing and request just a formal hearing at the Office of Administrative Hearings. Formal hearings are held at the Office of Administrative Hearings before an administrative law judge who will decide whether or not DDA erred in its decision. So the next several slides will break down the type of hearing based on the type of decision. Remember, most commonly, Medicaid fair hearings involve waiver denials, whereas informal or formal hearings are a result of state-only funding denials. So we'll start with which decisions rise to the need for a Medicaid fair hearing. Medicaid waiver service applicants who are denied eligibility for services. This means applicants who don't meet the definition of developmental disability as required by Maryland Health General 7-101F. What that is Maryland State Statute 7101F. It defines developmental disability and provides 5 criteria that you have to meet in order to be found eligible for DDA's full waiver services. When an application is submitted, DDA evaluates the application and decides whether or not the applicant meets these 5 required criteria. And eligibility can be complicated. When a person's found not eligible or eligible for another tier of eligibility, referred to as supports only, they receive notice and opportunity for a Medicaid fair hearing. So in order to be determined as a person with a developmental disability, you have to meet all 5 criteria. The second reason you would be offered a Medicaid fair hearing is if you're a Medicaid waiver service applicant who you were found eligible, but you disagree with the priority category assigned. So letters typically will say, if your circumstances change and you wish to be considered to be in a different priority category, please contact your regional office. So if you're found DD eligible and you disagree with the category on the waiting list that was assigned to you, you always can contact the regional office to discuss your disagreement before making a decision about whether you want to appeal or submit a request for reconsideration. And truly, you can do this with any adverse decision. You can discuss it with the regional office to get a better understanding. And when you're found DD eligible, you will be assigned a coordinator of community services, and the CCS also can help you with your priority category if you believe it's incorrect. Earlier, I provided a way to find COMAR regulations. The Code of Maryland regulation that describes in detail the priority categories is COMAR 1022-1207. COMAR 1022-1207 describes in general that the waiting list determines the order in which individuals waiting to get in the waiver are served, and they'll describe the category as crisis resolution, which includes individuals in emergent circumstances who require immediate intervention. For example, some people are homeless, victims of abuse or neglect, or at risk of causing physical harm, or living with a caregiver who cannot provide care. That is the crisis resolution category. Other categories include crisis prevention and current request, and these include people who have an urgent need, meaning for crisis resolution that they'll need, meaning for crisis prevention that there'll be a need to have their crisis resolved within a year. And the third category is current request, which includes people who need services but are not in a emergent circumstance. Some people are placed on the future need registry, and these are folks who don't need services until maybe sometime over the next 3 years, but they are known to DDA. So the second category, requesting a Medicaid fair hearing, include people who contest the service priority category assigned to them. And then the third category includes Medicaid waiver recipients whose claim for services is denied or is not acted on with reasonable promptness, or who believes the administration has taken an action erroneously. This is a broad category which does include when you submit a request for services or items with, say, a service funding plan or a budget modification, if that is denied. And maybe your claim is approved, but you feel that DDA did not act on the claim within the same time frame that DDA responds to similar requests. That's where you may feel that the request was not acted on with reasonable promptness. The third area covered in this slide is when the recipient is notified that DDA intends to or did take an action that's detrimental to the recipient's services. And in those cases, the recipient is provided with Medicaid fair hearing rights. These are the situations that require an opportunity for a Medicaid fair hearing, and we'll look at some situations that result in an informal or formal hearing. You're given the opportunity to choose an informal or formal hearing when you're an applicant who's denied eligibility for services paid for through state-only funding. So this means that applicants don't qualify for individual support services, and the statutory citation is included in the slide. So Maryland developmental disability law is different from the federal law, in which DDA has 2 tiers of eligibility. In a few slides back, we spoke about being eligible for full DD services. This is where you're found to not meet supports only services. So when you submit an eligibility application to the DDA, all eligibility applications are reviewed, and the DDA eligibility staff determine whether or not people qualify as a person with a developmental disability, meaning you meet 5 of 5 criteria, or supports only, which is also known as individual support services. With individual support services, you have to meet 2 of 2 criteria. This is where it can get a little confusing, because if you submit an application and you're found not eligible for supports only, you're also found not eligible for DD services, you're going to get 2 notices. You can appeal both findings. So you receive Medicaid fair hearing rights to appeal that you weren't found to meet 5 of 5 criteria. You also receive state hearing rights, so you can appeal that you weren't found eligible for supports only. And this is where it can get confusing, and you certainly will find that you have a lot of attachments to your DDA letter, and you're welcome to contact the regional office or my office to discuss what needs to be completed and submitted. The next circumstance that results in an opportunity for an informal or formal hearing is when a recipient of state-only funded services has a claim for services denied. So this may include people who receive state funding for individual support services, also known as supports only, whose modified service funding plan request has been denied. But most often this category includes low intensity support services, also known as LIS denials, including LIS eligibility and the denial of services or items covered under the Low Intensity Support Services Program. DDA's Low Intensity Support Services LIS program is funded with Maryland state-only funds. Therefore, all LIS disputes are resolved using the informal or formal hearing process. The third reason you may request an informal or formal hearing is when a DDA provider agency requests to discharge from its services. Before they do that, the provider agency is required to seek approval from DDA before discharging any DDA recipients. When the provider receives approval to discharge, the DDA regulation 1022-0202G creates a hearing right on DDA's part once DDA approves the discharge action. So that's the third reason for which you may be offered an informal or formal hearing, and that one's a little bit of an outlier since you may be getting discharged from a Medicaid provider, but in that case you're provided the opportunity for an informal or formal hearing. But as I stated earlier, you don't need to worry about determining if you need a Medicaid fair hearing or a formal or informal, because the notification will include a hearing request form to assist you in properly filing an appeal. If you need assistance filing your appeal, contact your CCS if you have one, or the DDA regional office. Remember when I said those DDA letters are long? Well, a request for reconsideration form is also included with the denial letter. So if you have information in addition to that which you provided with your service request or application for DDA services, you may send that information to DDA's regional office with a request for reconsideration. Whether or not that request is granted, you'll receive a new determination letter. So if you decide to request a hearing on the determination of your request for reconsideration, the time limits for requesting a hearing will start from the date of the new determination letter. A request for reconsideration form is enclosed with DDA's determination letters. So every time DDA receives new information, a new determination is made. So all new determinations provide new appeal rights. So if you submit information that DDA hasn't seen before with your request and DDA still denies your request, you will have the right to appeal beginning with the date of the new determination letter. So with this being said, there can be up to 6 enclosures with your determination letter. So it could include the Medicaid Fair Hearing Rights Notice, the Medicaid Fair Hearing Request Form, and the State Rights Notice and the Request for an Informal or Formal Hearing Form, as well as this Request for Reconsideration Form. We also provide an Interpreter Services Form. So do you want to appeal or reconsider? The DDA staff make their decisions based upon documentation. So if you think DDA is missing information to make the correct decision, submit this information with a request for reconsideration form. If you need assistance understanding the letter you received, you can contact the regional office. And if you wish, the regional office or your CCS, if you have one, may assist you in preparing and submitting your request for a hearing. If you need assistance filing your appeal, you can contact the CCS or the DDA regional office. The file must tell the whole story, not only so DDA can make the correct decision, but also to support the need in case the file is audited. So if an individual requires assistance pursuing a Medicaid fair hearing, your CCS can assist. DDA's policy indicates the CCS can provide the following assistance to an individual in the appeal process. First, the CCS can explain the appeal process to the individual, family, guardian, or authorized representative. Secondly, the CCS, the Coordinator of Community Services, can assist with the completion of the required forms for appealing a DDA determination. And third, the CCS can assist the individual in completing and sending the request for reconsideration. A CCS cannot provide legal advice or assist in preparing for, facilitate, or represent the individual in a Medicaid fair hearing. Well, who can request a hearing? An applicant, or if the applicant or recipient's a minor, the recipient's parent. An applicant or a participant's legal guardian, the attorney or paralegal retained by the applicant, or an authorized representative. And there's another Code of Maryland citation which describes the authorized representative as well as how to designate one. What an authorized representative means is it's an individual or organization who's acting responsibly on behalf of the applicant or recipient. It's in accordance with this said regulation, and they assist the applicant with their application or renewing eligibility or appeals or other ongoing communications with the DDA. To simplify the process of designating an authorized representative, DDA has created a form that is available to everyone that meets the criteria noted in the regulation. And this form is available. You could contact me or the regional office, and it will be easy for you to complete and submit with your appeal. Earlier I mentioned with the Medicaid fair hearing that you do have the opportunity to engage in a case resolution conference when you receive the letter informing you of an adverse action pertaining to waiver services. So if your application for eligibility was denied, if you dispute DDA's determination of your priority on the waiting list, DDA didn't provide a determination within a reasonable time of the date of application, if your request for services has been erroneously denied or not acted upon with reasonable promptness, then you have the opportunity to request a case resolution conference be held prior to your Medicaid fair hearing. The case resolution conference is voluntary, and it's called a dispute resolution process. The case resolution conference often is referred to as a CRC, where the participant, his or her family if applicable, and DDA engage in discussions surrounding the DDA decision or action in question. A CRC, case resolution conference, is not required prior to or as a substitute for a Medicaid fair hearing. And not all issues can be resolved in the CRC process. If there's partial agreement, that agreement will be recorded, and if the case goes on to the Medicaid fair hearing, only the remaining issues will be decided by the Office of Administrative Hearings. If there's no agreement, the participant and his or her family can proceed to the Medicaid fair hearing. So who can participate in a CRC? The applicant, or if the recipient's a minor, the recipient's parent, an applicant's legal guardian, an attorney or paralegal retained by the applicant, an authorized representative as described earlier, the applicant's CCS, or coordinator of community services, or an applicant's friends, family, or support staff. The CRC is scheduled by the DDA's operations office. Usually the CRC is actually scheduled by me, and the Maryland Department of Health grant one CRC which will occur before the Medicaid fair hearing, and it's usually held at one of DDA's regional offices or another location that's convenient for the appellant or the applicant. The CRC is the opportunity for you to have face-to-face discussion with the regional office, and regional office staff is really there to listen. They listen to understand your position. They don't listen to defend their position. They want to make the right decision. The CRC is informal, and it creates a forum to review what is and what is not in the file. A lot of times at the case resolution conference, discussion can lead to understanding of the other person's position and may lead to agreement. It can be helpful to have the applicant attend the CRC. The majority of DDA staff are not clinicians, therefore they're not qualified to diagnose, but reading a file is so different from meeting an applicant face-to-face. In the CRC, a lot of times gray areas can be clarified. For instance, the report might say Amy can't walk to the store, but this could be because I have no use of my legs. It could be because the store is 20 miles from my house, or it could be because I lack the safety skills to navigate the community. The appeals process is really intended to be user-friendly, and the regional office wants to make sure they have all the information to make the right decision. And the CRC is different from the Medicaid fair hearing because it's scheduled by DDA. Medicaid fair hearing notification will come to you from the Office of Administrative Hearings, and that is a different forum for your dispute. What can be resolved at the CRC generally is the positions of the applicant and the DDA regional office. So oftentimes the applicant doesn't understand why DDA denied the application. As I said before, the DDA letters are long and they include a lot of legal citations. At the CRC, this is where DDA, the staff at DDA typically aren't lawyers. They can talk face-to-face with the applicant to clarify the basis of their decisions. And in some cases, simply explaining the reason something was denied is sufficient to resolve the case. In other cases, the applicant may have information available that the regional office did not have when the decision was made. In these cases, that information may change the decision of the regional office. In other situations, the regional office may not have understood what the applicant was asking for, or why the applicant thinks he or she is eligible for services. Sometimes having a moderator may help the applicant explain these areas or clarify the request sufficiently to change the decision of the regional office. And in these CRCs, I act as the moderator, and I don't read the file, so oftentimes I hear things differently from someone who read through the file. Sometimes when you read the file, things are either copied and pasted, so the region gets an incorrect impression of the person, and then sometimes things are written and they may say the person self-medicates, and I've heard this can mean anything from they swallow a pill that's inserted in their mouth to they go to the pharmacy and fill their own prescriptions. So this is an opportunity for some areas to be clarified on both parts. Another thing that can be resolved at the CRC is whether the information submitted is sufficient for the regional office to make a determination. So in some cases, the applicant did not know what information should be presented with the application or request. In these cases, informing the applicant of the types of documentation that DDA needs in order to make an informed decision can eliminate the need for a Medicaid fair hearing. Please note that the regional office is not telling the applicant what information will result in an award of services, but rather what information must be presented in order for the regional office to adequately consider the request. In these situations, the applicant may have additional documentation that may change the decision of the regional office, or may wish to request additional time to get required assessments performed. In these cases, the applicant may decide to withdraw the request for a hearing and submit a request for reconsideration. And then, if the request for reconsideration is denied, the applicant is entitled to a new hearing process. And then the last part may be that whether the applicant or the regional office are correctly interpreting and applying statutes, regulations, and policies to the facts presented. And in some cases, having the moderator explain to the applicant the eligibility requirements, the statutes, and the regulations that govern the service requested, or the DDA's policy on a requested service, that might suffice to resolve the case. The moderator can also assist with ensuring that all relevant facts, law, criteria, and factors have been considered by the regional office in making the decision. So as I said, we really want to make sure we cut out some of the human error and we are able to correct information that may be incorrect. But DDA staff truly attend these CRCs to listen, to understand your position. So let's look at the next slide. So usually a CRC results in, a case resolution conference results in one of three outcomes. Either the case resolution conference results in no agreement, where the applicant will proceed to the Medicaid fair hearing, or the CRC results in DDA changing its determination, so the applicant won't need a Medicaid fair hearing, or the CRC case resolution conference results in the participant changing his mind and not planning to go to the Medicaid fair hearing. So sometimes people understandably confuse the case resolution conference and Medicaid fair hearing. Please understand they're different meetings. The case resolution conference is voluntary. This is where you choose to take advantage of an opportunity to communicate with the regional office and try to resolve without having to go to a hearing. And the Medicaid fair hearing is formal. It's held before an administrative law judge at the Office of Administrative Hearings. And all of the things, all of the time, location, and information pertaining to the Medicaid fair hearing is scheduled through the Office of Administrative Hearings. So any withdrawal of appeal or any changes in location, time, date, etc. have to be, for the Medicaid fair hearing, have to be arranged with the Office of Administrative Hearings. The DDA has no authority in changing anything with your Medicaid fair hearing. So I wanted to mention, if there's no agreement, oftentimes the appellant or the applicant wants a copy of his file. So you can ask to review any of the documents and records that DDA will use at the hearing, and I'm usually the person that you'll work with to ensure that only authorized people receive the protected health information that's included in your file. So after the CRC, then you have the opportunity to proceed to a Medicaid fair hearing if the dispute's not resolved. And then when you go to the Medicaid fair hearing, if you still have further disputes, that's when you receive appeal rights from the administrative law judge. So in addition to the regional office contact Patricia provided early at the beginning of this presentation, I'm providing additional contact information. This is my email address and my phone number in case you have received a denial and you're curious about where it is in the appeals process. I mentioned earlier that the Maryland Department of Health does have the Office of Health Services that processes all appeals that go to a Medicaid fair hearing or a formal hearing, and the appeals person is Christina White. And I mentioned if you have a Medicaid fair hearing and you need to make any changes or you want to withdraw your request for a Medicaid fair hearing, you have to do so by contacting OAH. And the docket specialist who works for the Maryland Department of Health is Jean T, and that's her contact information there. And with all hearings, DDA is represented by counsel, so I'm providing contact information for counsel that you could contact to see if they would want to represent you. So I know that we're kind of close to the end, so we could look at questions.
Sure. Okay, so let me read the first question that we have here is, please state again the 5 requirements for Medicaid fair hearing.
So I'm going back to the, so with the Medicaid fair hearing, generally, you're asking the 5 requirements or the 5 decisions that result in a Medicaid fair hearing?
She just has the 5 requirements.
Okay, so I did talk about 5 requirements to be found eligible as a person with a developmental disability. And those 5 requirements are listed in the Maryland Health General, the 7-101F. And the 5 requirements are, oops, I'm trying to get to the right page.
It's 14, page 14.
Thank you. So to qualify as a person with a developmental disability, a person has to have a severe chronic disability that is attributable to a physical or mental impairment other than the sole diagnosis of mental illness or to a combination of mental and physical impairments. It has to be manifested before the individual attains the age 22. The disability has to be likely to continue indefinitely. The disability results in an inability to live independently without external support or continuing and regular assistance, and the disability must reflect the need for a combination and sequence of special, interdisciplinary, or generic care, treatment, or other services that are individually planned and coordinated for the individual. I didn't go into the 5 criteria because eligibility is fairly complicated, and I believe there was a presentation on DD eligibility done in and of itself. So the question is, please.
So you got it. I mean,
okay, the 5 requirements for the Medicaid fair hearing.
Right. The next one is understand that the denial letter is very long. It includes many attachments, which explains all the person's rights and appeals. But is there anything in the letter which tells the person why the DDA denied the application? Because without that, how can the person know how to proceed?
Yes, there's a section of the letter that includes the what was denied, and then there's a second section that gives the basis for the denial. Oftentimes, the basis of the denial will also include a quote of a regulation, a statute, and sometimes they also take information from the waiver application and put it in there. So the answer to your question is yes, there is a section where DDA does explain why the application was denied. However, sometimes it's not easy to understand because it's written in a way that it's supported by regulation and statute. So having a conversation with the DDA regional office can help you understand exactly what the problem was with the application.
Somebody says, may want to state at the end the time frames, i.e. for modify our request for service change, etc., just for FYI purposes. I think that there's letters that have specific appeal, right? How many days they have to appeal from the time of the letters?
Yes, and in the letter, it will specify whether you have 45 days from the date of DDA's letter or 90 days from the date of DDA's letter. On top of the 45 and 90-day time frames, they also provide you with 4 days for mailing. So it's really 49 and 94 days as far as time frames for appealing.
Okay. I don't see any more questions. Donna, do you see any more questions than what is on the screen? I just want to be sure. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. If there's any more questions, please feel free to type them in. We have about 5 more minutes. And if there's not any, then we would end the webinar. So I'll just wait a few more minutes to see if anybody else types anything else.
So while we're waiting, I know I spoke a bit about the case resolution conference, which is offered prior to the Medicaid fair hearing. But if you have a denial that's for state-funded services and you're participating in an informal hearing, before the informal hearing happens, you do have a chance to meet with regional office staff for what's called pre-hearing conference. And the name of it's different, but pre-hearing conference is very similar to a case resolution conference. And that's where the applicant and DDA get to have some face-to-face contact. And that's where you can explain, you can get a better understanding of the denial and see if you can resolve the dispute without having to have an informal hearing. So both processes have the chance to have that discussion.
And who facilitates the CRC again?
The case resolution conference is facilitated by me. That's one of my roles. So usually one of my roles is processing the appeals, making sure they get where they need to get, if it's to the Office of Administrative Hearings or the regional office. I also have the role of being the secretary's designee, where at an informal hearing, I'll listen to the testimony and review the evidence and make a decision. And then one of my other roles is at a case resolution conference, I listen to both sides, try to help make sure if the region is using acronyms with which the appellant is unfamiliar, to make sure the appellant understands. If the appellant has questions that they need answered, or if anything's resolved, I can also document it, because sometimes at the CRC there are things discussed that need to be part of the file. So I can document that, and that's distributed to all people who attend the CRC and included in the individual's file.
And did you say earlier that there's an interpreter, or can you request one? How do you go about doing that?
Attached to your letter is a letter that describes interpreter services. So in the event you need a foreign language interpreter or sign language interpreter, that is facilitated for the case resolution conference. And also you can have that for the Medicaid fair hearing, formal or informal hearing.
Okay, that gives us 2 more minutes, and it looks like there's not any more questions. And there's some really nice, thank you so much for this. It was very helpful. Thank you for this helpful information, explanation of the process. Is the CRC the same as the pre-hearing conference?
So that's where they have the same goal as far as sharing information and resolving the dispute, but the CRC is only offered if your appeal rises to the need for a Medicaid fair hearing. If you have a state-only denial, like suppose you applied for low-intensity support services and it was denied, you won't have the opportunity for a case resolution conference. However, you'll have the opportunity for an informal or a formal hearing.
So I guess what you're really saying is, if you're using Medicaid money or you're in the waiver, you can request for a case resolution conference. If you're using state-only funding, then you can use the pre-hearing conference for the informal or the formal.
That's correct, yes.
Great. Wonderful questions. Excellent. Any other questions? If not, thank you guys for joining us, and stay tuned. We're hoping to post the June series. If you have any ideas of what our June series should be, you can type them on the screen as well, and we will take them for consideration. So Amy, thank you so much for your knowledge and wonderful information. This was very, very helpful. And again, we are recording this, so if you wanted to go back and look at any of the webinars, they are offered on our DDA website under webinars, and then click on the right-hand side and you'll see them listed. So thank you so very much. Have a great day. Bye.
Thank you.